What makes good storytelling? What makes it compelling? The way that a story is told is important because the reader or the listener must engage with the storyteller, identify with the narrative, and see oneself in the narrative. I remember a movie once called Dances with Wolves. I don't know if any of you remember it. An actress by the name of Mary McConnell was the female lead opposite Kevin Costner. And they were living and sleeping on the outside on the frontier. There were no hotels or fancy showers for Mary McConnell. But one critic said her makeshift pioneer costumes seemed to fit her pretty much like something you would have brought at the Nordstrom's Pioneer shop. And her pioneer hair always seemed to cascade down around her face and shoulders, much as if she had just stepped out of Supercuts. Plus, how could she manage to keep her makeup so fresh-looking in the Wild Wild West? A dirt spot mingled with blush there, a very subtle eyeshadow there. Good storytelling, that's how. The storytellers wanted those infatuated with Kevin Costner to see themselves opposite Kevin Costner. The storytellers wanted us who cared about the story to see the story through the storyteller's eyes. Last week we were in choir, maybe 2 weeks ago we were in choir rehearsing, and Dennis the tenor turned to me and said, "Who invented Advent?" I thought it was a great question. Advent, like Lent, is a theological construct, a narrative that has sprung up not so much in the Bible as from the Bible. A narrative that calls us to watch and wait and be aware of who is telling the story and what the Christmas story really means, what the Christmas story really can mean. Advent calls us to examine the oncoming of the baby's birth through the storyteller's eyes. So, who has those eyes through whom we should look? Should we look at the heavenly baby's arrival through the eyes of the earthly father Joseph, who, caught up in a series of circumstances not of his making, trying to catch his breath and make sense as his still young adult male life is turned around, watching as he is called to take this already expectant teenage mother into his home and cast over her the cloak of respectability through marriage so that the Messiah can come into the world? Should we look through his eyes? That is certainly an engaging story, still happening all around us today. That story would hold our interest. Oh, that we knew more about Joseph. Does he have something to tell us about Advent, about Christmas, about the baby's birth? Or are we looking at the narrative of Advent, being aware of the significance of the oncoming of this blessed baby through the eyes of the baby's mother, Mary? A girl all the way from nowhere. No family, no pedigree. A girl whom God has nonetheless called to serve as the vessel of God's holy promise coming into the world. A girl with no education, so no skills for completing such a world-transformative task. How is she going to figure out in all that is going to happen? How is she going to make a success of herself in a world that is male-dominated? A world that is so finance-dominated. A world that is so judgmental. That is certainly an interesting story, though, no doubt. Mary's story could be a page-turner. Why has the story of Mary never come to the silver screen? I asked the 5 o'clock service last night, who would play her? You all know who they said, don't you? Meryl Streep. That would certainly make a great movie. Or are we called to look at Advent through the eyes of the baby himself? Coming into the world, God's Son comes to earth in the human form of an infant with a mission and a message that will change the world. An infant that prophets had described as Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Are we to look through the eyes of Jesus, who, when he was a young preacher, after being tried in the desert for 40 days, marched straight into the temple, found the place in prophecy where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because it has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom from the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord." Jesus read that prophecy in the temple, and then Jesus had the nerve and the gall to say, "Today is that prophecy fulfilled in your hearing." He then handed the scroll back to the priests and the rabbis and sat down, while the rest of the priests and the rabbis were standing up. Some may say, no wonder they didn't like Jesus. He had a lot of nerve. Are we to find our Advent story through Jesus' eyes? Don't shoot me and lock me out of this beautifully appointed sanctuary. But the answer to all of this is essentially no. In this text, read by Deborah D'Alessandro in our hearing today, Jesus is revealing there is something eschatological about his birth. Something ordered by heaven. Eschatological meaning death and judgment and heaven and hell. Jesus said it is not for you to know the times or the seasons that the Creator has set by God's own authority. Matthew, the 24th chapter, the 36th verse says, "But about that day and hour of the second coming, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only God, the Creator." But when Jesus draws this dark and disturbing picture of the second coming that Deborah read, Jesus describes for us what Advent truly is. Jesus is telling us what staying awake for the Advent or the oncoming really looks like. What Jesus is saying is that by sending me, Jesus, as God the Redeemer to earth, God the Creator has set in motion the ultimate end of creation, when all of creation will be reconciled back to God. That is what Advent means, the oncoming of God's final plan. That is that for which we should be aware. Deborah read in our hearing, "The signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on earth, distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Some might add, people continually losing those who are nearest to them and feeling that they no longer have a reason to live. People always not having enough money on which to live. Young people struggling over and over, not able to enter society or make an honest living. People more and more cowering in their own homes from danger, where danger never seemed to exist before. The world enjoying more and more conveniences, but the world's problems of love and inclusion farther away than ever from being solved. The beginning of Advent is a narration by Jesus talking about the second coming. And listening to him tell of the second coming reveals to us that to truly understand his mission means that we have to understand that Jesus' birth clarifies the end of times theology. What makes compelling storytelling is a really compelling story. What Jesus wants us to understand is this, that his early beginning is a signal that the end has been activated. The red button with the timer has been pushed. The angels Gabriel and Michael are moving towards the ready. How could Jesus come a second time if he had not come a first time? Oh, Bill, that is so much poppycock, so much biblical rubbish. We don't want to talk about that. We just want to open presents, sing carols, drink spiked eggnog, and have a good time. One more time. Every year, you and I come to this birth story with a year's more experience than we had last year. More joys, but more disappointments. More successes, but some big losses. Happy to be here, but aware that our bodies won't do what they did 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Is something changing? We begin our journey to the manger one more time, hoping that our beat-up old faith will reveal something that makes this tedious life worth living and hoping for. How do we survive the political correctness? Oh, we can't say that anymore. That seems to be getting us nowhere. These endless debates between politicians who claim to have all of the answers, but we don't see them. And on and on. How many more times must we start over? How many more times can we start over? How many more apologies can we endure? Job losses, falling out of friendships, natural disasters, terrorist plots, again, losing people that we love, getting older. What are we hoping for, really? In this text, Jesus says there is a good story going on, and that is God the Creator, who is the master storyteller and narrator. As we approach the manger again, we engage in the story of hope in the following manner. No matter who you are, no matter what you're going through, no matter what people think of you, lift up your head. Don't pin your hopes on people liking you. Don't pin your hopes on what people think of you. Don't pin your hopes on pay raises and pensions and diets and vacations. Hope, rather, that no matter what you are going through, God has you by the hand. God has you by the heart, and God has you by the soul, and is ultimately guiding you through confusion and danger to where God is. In spite of all that we see, that is how we are to read the Advent story. That is the hope that we invest in our journey once again towards the manger. We are invested in more than what we will get for Christmas or how much we will eat. We invest our faith and we invest our hope in the moving, transformative force of God.